lawyers. Which case do you think you will come to regret taking for the rest of your career? Story 1. Lawyer shocked by client's traumatic confession and harm trial. My dad was an attorney for something like 25 years. He once told me about a time he was court-appointed to represent a guy on trial for taking a life. They called the guy up to testify, and the guy decided to make it a dramatic, movie-like courtroom moment and confess on the stand that he did it, even though he had pled not guilty, and that's why it was on trial. My dad said he believed the guy was innocent up until that moment. The guy just really wanted it to be rememberable, I guess, but it was kind of a stupid move as he could have gotten a plea deal if he had just said he was guilty in the first place. Instead, he got a longer, harsher sentence. Story 2. Client's arrogance leads to bar grievance despite case dismissal. Represented a young man charged in 2 separate incidents with aggravated assault and terroristic threat, respectively. I got both cases dismissed, which was not easy, and was the best possible outcome for him. He did not pay his bill and grieved me to the state bar twice for taking too long to get the cases dismissed. His name is now a byword for arrogance and ingratitude in my office. Story 3. Lawyer recounts moral hangover from illegal adoption case. Also, my mother, who works in law like me, told me about the case of illegal adoption that someone took care of. Literally an illegal exchange of a child. That was terrible, and I heard the lawyer had moral hangover. Edit. Adding some words. Story 4. Emotional toll of divorce cases. Frustrates. Dedicated lawyer. My mom usually regrets taking divorces. They can be very dramatic. Of course. But still, it's not only about money. Not to all of the lawyers, of course. But my mom gets pretty emotional. She is into the case all the time, and she cares about the justice in real sense. It gets frustrating. Plus, she thinks the divorce is the last thing that should happen. So, now you know why I don't live with her anymore. Haha. Story 5. Lawyer faces aggression while helping drug addicts with legal issues. Last year, me and my university mate were helping substance users with law problems. And though many of them were nice, it wasn't the nicest job. They'd turn aggressive and, well, you wouldn't like to be alone in these situations. Story 6. Defending grandpa with inappropriate defense in sex assault case. Appointed to defend grandpa accused of inappropriate actions toward a 9-year-old. His proposed defense, it takes 2 to tango. Edit. No confidentiality privilege broken. He said it to everyone. Story 7. Lawyer forced into paternity cases due to boss's criminal ties. My dad worked as a lawyer for 30-plus years and was involved in a case where he found out had ties to his boss, and they forced him to work paternity cases for actually pursuing leads, even if they involved his boss. Long story short, his boss was involved in a homicide, not sure how much he was involved, and his boss demoted my dad in an attempt to cover it up. In the end, the boss did get in trouble, and my dad moved and got a better job. Story 8. Lawyer's office contaminated by client's left cocaine. To quote my uncle's best friend, the one full of a controlled substance, he showed up in court with something a client left in his office. Story 9. Lawyer recalls challenging adoption cases with ethical dilemmas. I was an adoption attorney. You'd think a nice, pleasant area of law. Think again. The stories I could tell. I shouldn't have said anything. Attorney-client privilege. Giving facts on a case could reveal someone's case or identity. It will cost you $350 an hour, plus fees and expenses. Story 10. Lawyer witnesses defendant's outburst and physical altercation in court. Not a lawyer, but I was recently watching a court case for a law class. The judge was recounting some crimes that the defendant had already been convicted of. The defendant got angry and started yelling at the judge about how he didn't do those things. He then stood up, called the judge a goof, and punched the glass of the booth. Story 11. Lawyer regrets financial ruin caused by prolonged wage dispute. An ex-boss of mine has spent over 7 years litigating a relatively small case, about $300,000 in total liability. The defendants refused to settle, and their lawyer was totally inept and possibly mentally ill, filing all kinds of voluminous, 1,000-plus pages, and totally frivolous motions. He appealed every magistrate ruling to the district judge, and then tried to appeal every district judge ruling to the Federal Court of Appeals. He was even sanctioned for his conduct, which he of course appealed to the Court of Appeals. The punchline is that this was a case for unpaid wages and overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, and state labor law, which provided that defendants have to pay plaintiffs' attorney fees. So the defendants were not only getting clocked by their attorney for all of these motions, appeals, etc., but also my ex-boss was accounting for all the time he had to spend on it. Case goes to trial. Plaintiffs win about $300,000 in damages and a whopping $600,000 in attorney's fees. Defendants appeal the jury verdict and lose, then separately appeal the fee determination and lose. Then they refuse to pay the judgment. We bring a post-judgment proceeding to overturn obvious fraudulent transfers they made after the trial, giving away their houses and other property to friends and family, etc. Midway through this procedure, they file for bankruptcy. The whole thing is just a mess for everyone. My ex-boss is basically financially ruined by this case, still waiting for, now $800,000 plus, in attorney's fees he's probably never going to get to collect. The defendants were financially ruined by their crazy attorney, who clocked them over $300,000 in fees while ruining their lives. Their friends and family members have been drawn into the litigation over the fraudulent transfers, and they may well end up facing jail time due to fraudulent statements on their bankruptcy filings. The plaintiffs are still waiting on wages they should have been paid almost 10 years ago. Oh, and I got laid off because my ex-boss couldn't afford to pay me anymore after all of this. So yeah, all in all, maybe it would have been better if he'd lost the case years ago. Story 12. Lawyer struggles with defending abusive client in eviction case. I'm a legal services attorney, which is essentially a public defender but for civil issues like housing and debt collection defense. So, I don't get to pick my clients. As you can imagine, I've represented quite the cast of characters. I haven't regretted winning anything, because this is what I've signed up for, and I truly believe everyone deserves legal representation when they need it. But I certainly don't love all of my clients. The worst client I had was a monstrous, abusive person who used substances whose landlord was attempting to evict him after the cops came for the umpteenth time. I sympathized with the landlord and hated my jerk of a client who called me an extremely offensive name no less than 15 times, but I prevented the eviction. Story 13. Lawyer questions system after client re-offends post-victory. Had a client who had been convicted of assault and was just finishing up his prison sentence. The state was pushing to have him declared a chronic offender and have him civilly committed after he got out of prison, but he did not quite meet the criminal history criteria. We won on that one, but less than a month later he was arrested for assaulting a sex worker/substance user. I don't regret representing him. The state should never be allowed to bend the rules on imposing a penalty as drastic as permanent civil commitment, but I do regret that the law didn't make adequate provision for dealing with guys like him. I'll also always wonder if the second victim wasn't a setup. I wonder if somebody in the county prosecutor's office didn't tell her what kind of history this guy had with teen and preteen girls, and offer her a deal or substances out of the evidence locker or something if she'd help stick him with a charge that would qualify him for permanent commitment. Story 14. Lawyer regrets winning case against elderly cat seller. Right before taking my bar exam in Germany, I was working in a small law firm as a law apprentice. There was one case which was given to me because it was considered unwinnable, but the client insisted on pushing through. The case was about an elderly lady who sold her cat because she was too sick to take care of her. The buyer of the cat, our client, a rather wealthy lady, took the cat to the vet right after buying it. Apparently the cat needed 2,000 euros worth of surgeries. She hired us to collect those 2,000 from the old lady. She was really an unpleasant woman, to say at least. She acted without even the slightest bit of remorse or empathy. She knew exactly in what situation the old lady was, because she was the one who informed us about it. Nevertheless, we won the case pretty quick, even though our client didn't have a leg to stand on. Story 15. Paralegal feels gross after helping acquit sex offender. Not a lawyer, but when I was a paralegal, my boss got a client acquitted of the most serious charge of first-degree assault. We had a confession he'd given to our firm's hired therapist, locked in my boss's desk drawer. During the trial, the lawyer had me, at the time a woman in my 20s, sit directly beside the client, so the jury could see I wasn't afraid of him. He insisted on taking the stand. During his testimony, I casually turned around to look at his wife. On her face was etched a look of horror. She, who knew him best, could tell he was lying. Up to that point, I guess she'd believed his story that the teenaged employee was just after his money. I felt so gross after that and switched to a real estate and refinance law firm. Story 16. Prosecutor regrets winning cases against parents in child neglect. I used to prosecute neglect cases in a big city in America for Child Protection Services, CPS. After a few high-profile cases where young kids lost their lives at the hands of family members, CPS started asking us to file on pretty much everybody. I understand why, but I wish they would have stood up to the bad press instead of allowing it to dictate who they brought to court. From that point on, I would say about half my cases, even though a cause of action existed, I felt guilty for winning. Edit. Location removed. No thanks, Ethics Committee. Story 17. Labor lawyer regrets winning case costing employee pension. Was a labor lawyer for some time, and we had a no-exception policy against using the company credit card for personal expenses. Everyone knows you get fired for it, because they beat it into you with frequent training, make you sign stuff, etc. We fired a guy who was a few months from retirement, and his union filed for arbitration. Arbitration is kind of a joke, and any labor lawyer will tell you that no arbitrator would uphold that termination, even if the guy wasn't near retirement. We won. Due to the way the pension worked, the fact he left before he reached 55 led to a massive pension discount, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh, by the way, his offense was filling up his car with gas, using company card because he had left his personal card somewhere and was going to run out of gas. On the other side of the coin, I had many employees do insane things like hide and sleep at work for 40 hours, lead to a 30,000-gallon gasoline spill, fighting, death threats, etc., who all got their jobs back through arbitration. Story 18. Lawyer regrets helping client hide $50,000 in divorce case. I used to do divorces, mostly. I'm not cut out for that work, but it's the job I could get out of law school. A guy came in for a divorce and seemed, by all accounts, really nice. He claimed that they had $50,000 in cash in their safe, and that his wife had taken it out when she left the house. His ex-wife never worked, so seemed reasonable she would take the money to help pay bills, start over, etc. 6 months in, though, when we were finalizing property, his true colors started to show. Refusing to let her have the toaster, arguing over giving her anything even though she hadn't worked their entire 15-year marriage, telling her she could have half of the expensive plants she. Story 19. Defense attorney feels guilty after acquitting a likely guilty client in a date rape case. Defense attorney here. I've represented many clients in assault cases. I've been lucky in that every one of them, I was either confident they were not guilty, or at the least knew there was reasonable doubt and an acquittal was the right result. There was one client, however, when I was not. It was a case involving an alleged assault on a date where the alleged victim was highly credible in my opinion, and there was some physical evidence. I didn't want my client to even talk to me because I was afraid he would accidentally confess and limit my options if he chose to testify. Alleged victim testified, and of course came off as credible. I felt my cross was pretty ineffective too, as she answered my questions truthfully. I was fully prepared for a guilty verdict, but the jury came back with a full acquittal. I guess when you consider the evidence against the government's very high burden of reasonable doubt, it makes a little sense. But this is a prime example that winning doesn't always feel great. Story 20. Lawyer regrets enforcing child support on man who voluntarily signed birth certificate knowing he wasn't the father. I had a client whose boyfriend agreed to be listed as the dad on the birth certificate, despite him knowing he was not the father of the child. At the time of the birth, he swore an affidavit he was the biological dad, and it got filed by the state. Of course, he and his girlfriend broke up shortly thereafter. A few years later, he regretted his decision, and no longer wanted to pay child support for a child that wasn't his. Representing the mom, I successfully made the argument that although a non-biological father could get out of paying child support in the case of fraud perpetrated by the mother as to the paternity of the child, no such defense was available to a man who voluntarily signed a birth certificate with full knowledge that he was not the father. The law was on my side, but it seemed like a pretty hefty punishment for someone who made a stupid mistake. Story 21. Lawyer wins case for abusive foster father, later regrets it. In undergrad, I took a law course taught by a former prominent defense attorney. Someone once asked why he left such a lucrative practice to teach, and he told us this story. There was a guy who, with his wife, had 2 foster children, boys around 10 or so. One of the boys got good grades, was a Boy Scout or something. The other boy was always in trouble in school, had been caught stealing and lying in the past. Well, the troublesome kid told someone that the foster dad, an esteemed community member, had been abusing him. The foster dad swore he never touched him. With the kid's background of lying and being in trouble, it was clear he had made this up, and that was the entire defense case. The boy took the stand, cried as he was called a liar. The defense was definitely going to win. Well, the day before closing arguments, the professor/lawyer meets with his client and tells him he's pretty sure they are going to win, goes over closing. Suddenly, foster dad asks if anything he tells his lawyer can be shared. The lawyer tells him it cannot. Foster dad looks at him and says, "You know all those things he said I did to him? I did those things. I feel bad about it and won't do it again. But thank you for believing me." My professor tried to get himself removed from the case, but because it was the day before closing arguments, it wasn't allowed. He won the case. Edit. I should add that the good kid said the foster dad had never touched him and was a good dad. This made the other kid look even worse. Obviously, this guy was a legit predator because he chose a victim no one would believe. Story 22. Lawyer regrets winning custody for unfit mother, takes children from caring father. A while back, I had a client who was fighting for sole custody of her children. Her ex-husband was a wealthy businessman. When they married, they had a prenuptial agreement whipped up, so their assets weren't being debated. This trial was all about the kids, and she was hell-bent on getting them. The problem was, this woman wasn't faithful in their marriage, and the prosecutor played a tape from a private eye the husband had hired, for he had his suspicions. It was blatantly her being intimate with someone else while married. This was devastating to the case. But after doing some research, I found that she was not 18 years old when she got married to this man. She had lied about her age and therefore had signed her prenuptial agreement while a minor, rendering it invalid. Sadly, this meant she lost the prenup, but we worked out a deal to get her a healthy reparation from the husband, and she got the kids. But she was a horrible mother, and their father was a good man. I immediately regretted winning that case. I took the children from their loving and caring father. Story 23. Lawyer wins default judgment against widow, regrets aggressive credit card debt case. I'm going to go ahead and list my personal worst case, and the worst I've ever heard during my career. A while back, I represented credit card companies suing for outstanding debts, where we had pretty stringent client guidelines dictating how we handled lawsuits. The bottom line was that we were to be aggressive in court so as to put our client in favorable positions during any settlement negotiations. One defendant was a 40-year-old woman who had maxed out all her credit cards in a futile attempt to pay for health care for her husband, who ultimately died of cancer. In total, she had spent something along the lines of $60,000 paying for chemotherapy, hospital stays, and various other bills. She ended up losing her job, husband, and home, all within the span of 3 months. She didn't even bother showing up for hearings or responding to the complaint, meaning my client won a default judgment against her. The worst part? I had to stand up and tell the judge what my client was entitled to: $60,000 for principal amount, $80,000 for interest and late fees, $10,000 in attorney's fees. She now has a judgment of $150,000 against her. I refuse to do that line of work anymore and have made it a point to represent people against credit cards if the opportunity presents itself. Story 24. Family law client fights for dog only to abandon it. In a family law case, my client fought really hard for the dog during the divorce proceedings, insisting on keeping it despite the ex-wife's attachment. We managed to secure the dog for him through favorable rulings, but shortly after, he turned the dog over to a shelter. The ex-wife received an anonymous tip about the dog's location and was able to get him back quickly. It turned out the fight wasn't even for the dog. It was just to take something she loved away from her, showcasing how divorce can bring out the worst in people. Story 25. Personal injury win leads to client's drug addiction. As a personal injury attorney, I've seen clients win what we call the blue-collar lotto, getting more money than they reasonably know how to handle. I do my best to educate them, but my job is to maximize their recovery, not teach finance. I regret that in some cases, I've contributed to clients developing substance use habits, as they struggled to manage the sudden influx of cash, leading to poor decisions and dependency. Story 26. Civil commercial trial victory results in unpaid fees. When I was a young associate, I was assigned to a civil commercial trial for a client unhappy with the senior partner. He stopped paying us, and we moved to withdraw, but the court refused, forcing us to go to trial. I spent significant time in trial preparation and won, but the client never paid, claiming my boss screwed up the deal. Firm policy prohibited suing clients for non-payment due to increased malpractice premiums, leaving me with no recourse. Story 27. Divorce case where husband trades custody for furniture. I handled a divorce where the husband, whom I represented, wanted to trade custody of his children for a set of bedroom furniture, not even a family heirloom, but something you could get at a store like Rooms to Go. We won that point, but it left me feeling ill, as it showed his priorities were objects over his kids. This experience was a major reason I got out of family law, as it highlighted the ugliness of such cases. Story 28. Custody win for mother ends in boyfriend's assault on daughter. I worked on a case where we used the state preference for mothers, the mother's improved economic situation, and minor issues like the daughter's grades to discredit the dad and win custody for the mother. Less than a month later, she called saying she had a problem. Her boyfriend had seriously harmed the daughter. She even asked us to defend him. This betrayal and the harm to the child made me quit government work, feeling complicit in the outcome. Story 29. Juvenile client killed after multiple wins and turning life around. I represented a client first as a juvenile for disorderly conduct and fighting, then as an adult for minor charges like substance possession. I counseled him to better himself. He got his General Educational Development GED, attended Narcotics Anonymous NA, started community college, and found a part-time job. On his 21st birthday, he was charged with driving while intoxicated, DWI, which I was handling. 6 months later, he didn't show for court. I learned he was fatally harmed in a drive-by incident at a party. The case was dismissed as You cannot prosecute a deceased person, but it crushed me as I thought he had turned his life around. Story 30. Prosecutor convicts young man for manslaughter in self-defense scenario. I prosecuted a harm case where a 21-year-old started dating an older guy's ex-girlfriend. The older guy, with biker gang connections, threatened him publicly and sent inappropriate photos while intoxicated, leading to a confrontation at the kid's house. The kid shot him once, and he passed away. The jury didn't buy self-defense or castle doctrine, convicting him of voluntary manslaughter with a 20-year sentence. It haunts me, as I have a son his age and can imagine him in the same situation, making me question my role in prosecution. Story 31. Client killed after bail win in drug-related chase. I got a client out on bail, but he was later killed during a police chase while allegedly selling substances and was fatally harmed. His mother blamed me, saying I was working with the district attorney, DA, and police. Another time, a 16-year-old I got released on robbery charges with a curfew condition, broke it that night, went to another house, and lost his life in a substance-related robbery. His mother blamed me too, calling me a demon. Story 32. Appeal win on dubious preservation grounds. I won an appeal earlier this year on preservation grounds, which I felt was dubious. The underlying issue was interesting and a close call, and while I would have been thrilled to win on the merits, I regretted winning in this manner, feeling it did not address the core legal issues properly. Story 33. Victory due to opposing counsel's mistakes. As a commercial litigator, I expressed regret when suspecting my win was due to the other party's lawyers missing a game-changing point or handling the case poorly, leading to a victory that felt undeserved. Story 34. Win based on judge's misunderstanding of law. As a large firm litigator, I found it disheartening to read a judge's decision that completely misunderstood the underlying legal issues, resulting in a win for my client but creating bad precedent or necessitating a convoluted appeals process. Story 35. Prolonged wage dispute ruins finances for all involved. My ex-boss's case involved unpaid wages and overtime under the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, where defendant's inept lawyer dragged out the case for over 7 years. The plaintiffs won $300,000 in damages and $600,000 in attorney's fees, but the defendant's appeals and fraudulent transfers led to financial ruin for all parties, including the lawyer, who couldn't collect fees and laid off staff. Story 36. Preventing civil commitment leads to client reoffending. I won a case preventing a client convicted of assault from being civilly committed post-prison, as he didn't meet the criteria. Less than a month later, the client was arrested for assaulting a sex worker/substance user, leading me to regret the law's inadequacy for dealing with such individuals and wonder if the second victim was set up by the prosecutor's office. Story 37. Dismiss domestic violence cases due to recanting witnesses. As a third-year law student interning at a public defender office, I felt crappy after domestic violence cases were dismissed because spouses recanted and wouldn't testify. Seeing cheerful clients likely to reoffend, despite victim statements and photos of abuse, caused moral discomfort. Story 38. Repeat speeding offenders get dismissals, enabling dangerous behavior. Defending traffic infractions, I regretted getting dismissals for repeat offenders speeding 10+ times a year, feeling like I was enabling dangerous behavior, though I continued for the business, noting officers often don't show up, leading to dismissals. Story 39. Innocent man on death row due to attorney privilege. I heard about an Innocence Project case where a man was convicted and sentenced to death for a crime another man confessed to his lawyer. The confessor died, leaving the innocent man on death row, but the lawyer was bound by attorney-client privilege, even posthumously. Revealing the confession could disbar him and ruin his life, and might not overturn the conviction. No lawyers felt good about this, hoping a judge found a way to free the innocent man without destroying the lawyer's career. Story 40. Drunk driver's brother meets lawyer's daughter. My co-worker's father, a lawyer, defended an intoxicated driver who caused the death of a local teen, keeping him out of jail 4 to 5 years ago. My coworker, commuting from far away, matched with a guy on Tinder and was excited for days. On the date day, she discovered he was the brother of the teen who passed away. She never told him who her dad was, and they didn't call each other the next day, likely due to an awkward, strained meeting. Story 41. Cop caught stealing walks free due to technicality. I saw a local news case where a former cop was caught on camera stealing from businesses, convicted, and waived his right to a speedy trial to complete a program longer than 180 days. His lawyer wasn't present when he waived, nullifying it, so he walked free. The lawyer seemed sheepish in the interview, likely regretting the technical win that let a guilty man off, especially given the public nature of the crime. Story 42. Innocent man sentenced, attorneys silent. I learned about the Alex case, where attorneys Chris and David knew their client, Ben, confessed to a homicide for which Alex was tried. Legally bound by attorney-client privilege, they couldn't reveal it, watching Alex get sentenced to life, spending 26 years in jail, until Ben died and they could disclose the confession. The moral-legal conflict left them divided, attending his sentencing, feeling powerless. Story 43. Terrorist freed due to politics. Working for a large law firm, we won freedom for a suspected terrorist, likely guilty of a serious atrocity, but politics prevented conviction. I can't disclose details, but the victory felt hollow, knowing the legal system was swayed by external pressures, leaving me with regret over the potential danger released back into society. Story 44. Stalking case. Client shocked by not guilty verdict. I handled a misdemeanor stalking case, and my client wanted a jury trial. I had to question the harassed girl, and the jury found him not guilty. He turned to me, incredulous, asking, "They found me not guilty?" The outcome left me uneasy, knowing he seemed unaware or unremorseful, and I regretted the victory for the victim's sake. Story 45. Copyright win, unpaid judgment, client's death. We took a copyright case to trial twice and an appeal, winning each time on contingency, meaning no pay unless we won. Years later, we couldn't collect the judgment, as the defendant hid assets, paid in cash, and died from a virus, likely avoiding probate. The victory felt hollow, with no payment for us or the client, leaving me frustrated after years of effort. Story 46. Homeless man's victory led to tragedy. Representing a homeless man, the government tried to force him into rehab for public indecency, like exposing himself outside windows and stealing. We won, arguing his rights, but shortly after he had a fatal overdose on the streets. The win allowed him freedom, but it led to his demise, making me question if forcing help would have saved him, a regretful outcome. Story 47. Defense attorney's moral dilemma in a date rape case. As a defense attorney, I usually felt confident in my client's innocence in assault cases, but this one was different. It was a case involving an alleged assault on a date, and the alleged victim seemed highly credible, with some physical evidence supporting her claim. I was so uneasy that I avoided letting my client talk to me, fearing he might confess and limit my options. During the trial, she testified truthfully, and my cross-examination felt ineffective. I was prepared for a guilty verdict, but the jury acquitted him. Despite the legal win, considering the government's high burden of proof, it didn't feel like a victory. Story 48. Winning custody for an unfit parent. I represented a mother in a custody battle, arguing she was fit, despite reports of neglect. We won, and she gained custody, but later I learned she wasn't caring for the child properly, leading to further issues. The legal victory felt hollow, knowing I helped place a child in a potentially harmful situation. It was a case I regretted taking, as the emotional toll of the child's welfare weighed heavily on me. Story 49. Acquitting a violent offender due to technicality. I defended a client accused of assault, and we won on a technicality, the prosecution missed a filing deadline. Evidence showed he was violent, and witnesses were credible, but the law was clear. Watching him walk free, knowing he likely committed the act, left me feeling complicit. The win was legally correct, but the moral conflict of letting a potential danger go unpunished stayed with me, a regretful moment in my career. Story 50. Representing a corporation in an environmental case. I took a case for a corporation accused of polluting a river, and we won by arguing insufficient evidence. Later, reports confirmed their negligence caused health issues in the community. The legal victory was a professional success, but knowing I helped a company evade responsibility for harming people and the environment filled me with regret. It was a case I wish I hadn't taken, given the human cost. Story 51. Defending a landlord in an eviction case. I represented a landlord evicting tenants for non-payment, and we won, forcing a family out. Later, I learned they were struggling due to job loss, and the eviction led to homelessness. The law was on our side, but the human impact seeing a family displaced left me feeling guilty. It was a win I regretted, as the emotional weight of their suffering lingered. Story 52. Neighbor's predatory behavior leads to long sentence. Not a lawyer, but I knew a 19-year-old neighbor who groomed underage teens, letting them smoke to lure them in. He was so guilty, getting 16 years in prison 12 years ago. One of the teens later got involved in a homicide, making me reflect on the long-term impact of such cases, and the lawyer likely regretted the defense given the clear predation. Story 53. Adoption Attorney's Dark Realities. I was an adoption attorney, thinking it'd be nice, but think again. The stories I could tell, though I can't due to attorney-client privilege. It involved potential fraud, negligence, and disguised human trafficking, like couples breaking up post-adoption or birth moms wanting babies back, making it a brutal, regretful area of law full of heartbreak and ethical dilemmas. If you feel unsafe with your thoughts, please seek professional help. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education.